All right there, welcome everybody. My name's Scott Maier. This is Artist Network Drawing Together. We meet every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern to draw together. And you may have noticed that there's something screwy with my voice. I was not kind to my vocal cords yesterday. And so now I am healing, and I've got this weird, scratchy voice. But I will do my best to try to continue on and hopefully be clear in my speech. So it's another beautiful day here in Colorado. Again, it's Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern, where we come together to draw together. This is what we're working on today, this tabby cat. Now, this is part of the pet project series that we're doing, all to help prepare for the Artist Network Best in Show competition. So if you want to check out that, I pinned it at the top of the chat as well as in the description below. Just kind of focusing on drawing these pet portraits and hopefully as inspiration and support for any of you who are looking to enter that competition. So again, so what we're working on today, this cute little photo of this tabby cat. We were working in graphite yesterday, or last week, I'm sorry, we worked in charcoal with that portrait of the Yorkie. That was so much fun to draw. Now we got this cat that has this awesome expression. I want to see if we can capture that today. And maybe try out a different approach to drawing. I'm kind of feeling like I've been in this rut of approaching drawings the same way. So I'm gonna see if I can shake things up. I feel like I wanted to do something different today, a little bit different. So let's just go for it. If you want to follow along, you can find the reference image in the description below. You can bring that up and follow along with, or if you just want to sit back and watch, you can do that as well. You'll also find a link to the show page on artistnetwork.com. So when you're done with your drawing, you can share it there. So, all right. Welcome, everybody. I love to see all these familiar names. It's great to be back with everybody. I feel like I've been missing this all week. I've been looking forward to drawing with you all again. So, while I have this up, this is what we're working on next week. So I was working on this preparatory drawing. It's this fun little parakeet in charcoal. That was a lot more fun even than I anticipated. This one I'm a little bit nervous about today because it was just really hard to draw, in part because I feel like I missed the expression, but as with any portrait, human or animal, the subtle changes in the shape of the eyes, tilts of the mouth, things like that can totally change the expression. And he looked really grumpy and sad earlier, and I've been trying to fix it so he didn't look quite so sad, because he looks pretty chill in the photograph. So I want to try to capture that. Oh, there was a version of it where he looked like he was about ready to break down into tears, and I didn't want that. That doesn't sound good. So the other thing that I want to kind of tackle, and by doing this preparatory drawing, it kind of came to light, is the light. There's not a distinct directionality to the light source. We have some balance between kind of dark areas and light areas that help to create a relatively balanced composition and an interesting design. But what was really challenging was creating that sense of depth along this side in particular when that value range is fairly similar. We have that one shadow in here. And ultimately what creates that depth is the directionality of the marks and the changing patterns, and some of the very subtle things that we're going to incorporate in the drawing. So I might try to look into that. That might be something I focus a little bit more on today's version, is to try to create that sense of structure. Because when I look at this version here, I have kind of his expression, and he's the focal point, or she's a focal point. But everything else kind of feels a little bit flat and a little awkward to me. So I want to try to create a little bit more depth. So let's see. There's a question, but I'm not quite sure I understand the question. Do I have portraits of animals? So, but yeah, so we're working on portraits today. See what we can do. Materials that I'm working with, I've got actually a smaller sheet of paper to work with. This one took a lot longer to complete than I would like. And so in order to try to speed things up today, I've kind of shrunk things down a little bit. So this is about a 9 by 11, somewhere around there. So it's the same dimensions as the reference photo in the description below. Graphite that I'm working with, I love these Creative Mark Cezanne pencils, and I'm about ready to get a new set. They're these ones right here. They do have a bit of a bias towards the darker, kind of softer graphite. So you can see that the hardest graphite is a 2H, and it goes all the way up to a 12B. My 12B is kind of worn down to the nubbins, and so I didn't really it was a pain to sharpen this one. I really kind of wanted to use this, but I might get into that. So I have the 2H. I have the, what do I got here? 10B is the darkest I'm going to go. So it's pretty close to the 12B. It's going to get pretty dark. And I've got the, the 2H, the 4B, and the 10B. So a range. So I've got my hard in the 2H. I've got my 4B as my mid kind of hardness, the mid-range, and then I've got my 10B for my darks. I'm also going to try blocking it in with some of these Derwent XL graphite blocks. So I'll grab a stick of the soft graphite. I'm going to smooth it out with this paper towel that I've been using for a little while for a few drawings now. I've got my trusty blending stump, and I misplaced my kneaded eraser. So this is the first episode in 116 where I haven't used a kneaded eraser. It hasn't been, and it's in the materials list, but I couldn't find it today. So instead, what I'm going to use is my Derwent retractable eraser. Of course, I always have shaved down to this chisel tip to give me a nice fine point. And then I also have their slim eraser to get some broad areas in there. So we'll just kind of go for it. All right. Mad Moments goes. I do not have a cold. I was just not kind to my vocal cords yesterday. And so I was goofing around and being loud, and I could feel something not right in my throat there. So I messed that up. So, but I'm feeling fine, and I don't have COVID, which is great. Okay, what am I doing now? Got to get my head in the game. One of the reasons I kind of chose to was going to kick off the drawing with this XL graphite is, I've done it a few times, but I just want to kind of shake things up a little bit. And just by changing up the material, it kind of puts my head in a different space. Right? And that's kind of what I'm aiming for today. I'm not thinking linearly at this point. I'm just trying to kind of block in some values. It gets a little bit tricky with this tape along the edges because it lifts up along the tape edge, and so I have to do a little finessing there. So it's kind of just squinting my eyes. I'm kind of loosely referencing the shape of the cat to establish a bit of a gesture. And then, I'm just kind of rolling into the corner a little bit if I need a smaller mark, but otherwise I'm laying it flat on the surface to build up some layers. And in this way, it gives me an opportunity to explore with my eyes the overall form, just kind of take it all in, and then from there we'll kind of adjust. And so that's generally my process here, is to establish a gesture and then gradually refine that. But I'm going to refine it in slightly different ways. I think what I want to do is kind of map out the form a little bit more. I think that's where in the preparatory version I spent a long time kind of spinning my wheels trying to get the proportions right. And so I want to kind of lead with that a little bit earlier than I might otherwise. So with that in mind, what I want to kind of bring up is, the topic of edges. We talk about that a lot in this show, is the role that edges play. Now, in a subject like this, we can clearly identify the head, the arm, its back, the body. But when we really analyze it and understand the visual information, it becomes really hard to determine where the edge of the head is, where the edge of the arm is. It's like we know it, but really trying to identify it, you realize that it's a very subtle and soft transition. So in a way, our brain is starting to invent a certain amount of information to make sense of the form. All right, and so what I did in this initial sketch is I really started from this sense of softness and merging those edges and then gradually trying to refine them. I want to see what happens today if I flip that and almost kind of treat them like hard edges that are gradually soft. soften. And so we've talked about that again before. I say that like my approach has always been to kind of build from these blocks of value and then find the edges within that, because I often throw myself off when I think linearly about the structure, when I establish a linear shape for the form, and because then what we're trying to do is we're constantly kind of battling this hard line. So I'm gonna give myself a hard line, and I'm gonna show you how we battle that. That makes sense. Oh, I'm already like, what color am I using? Let's see. Well, so for this XL graphite, it's the soft. Is it a 03? And then I'm gonna be, actually, I grabbed the wrong pencil here. No, I'm gonna leave that locked in. I'm gonna start with the 2H, kind of the harder graphite, but I'm gonna intentionally use it on its side. I'm gonna use this overhand grip, because with the harder graphite, if I'm not controlling the pressure effectively, I'll end up creating an embossed line that I'll have to contend with throughout the rest of the drawing. Deborah Viner is, what do I think of a camera lucida? Oh, I just did a road test of the camera lucida app, and I actually have a traditional camera lucida as well. I think they're awesome. And I think you should use them if you want to. I think optical devices like a camera lucida, like the DaVinci Eye app, like the camera lucida app, that kind of lean in the direction of those traditional camera lucidas, that mindset of trying to overlay the subject in the drawing, right? It's what a camera lucida does is it's a physical representation of what we're doing as artists in our minds, right? So we have the subject that's in one location, we have our drawing, and in our mind, the drawing and the subject merge, and then we try to execute that on the paper. And what a camera lucida does is it superimposes the image, the subject that's in front of you with the drawing itself, so you see them physically overlapped. So it kind of accelerates the accuracy of the proportions, and there can be some limitations, but in the end, I feel like they can be beneficial because they helps us to confront the relationship between ourselves, the drawing, and the subject. You know, I think anything that gives us an opportunity to explore that dynamic is really helpful. And what I find that when I use those, it helps us with information, but it's not going to show you how to construct a drawing. Now, some of those apps have different breakdown features that can help you break down a drawing into different shapes and see things in different ways. But for me, what those tools offer is an opportunity to simply confront all of these things in a new way, and then sometimes it makes it more concrete to actually improve drawing from life. If that makes sense. I don't prescribe to the notion that any tools that are available to us are cheating. It's just a matter of identifying what's serving us and what's not, right? And so for some of you, you may say like, oh, well, my goal is to become better and more accurate at direct observational drawing without the use of those tools, and so using those tools might help you get there, but if your ultimate goal is to not use them, you want to be clear about that. And if you don't care, if you just say, like, they're tools, I like to use them, I like the image that's being made from them, then go for it. So that's my input, and I always welcome everybody else's. I don't know if, hopefully you're able to see the lines on the page. What I'm trying to do is kind of map out the basic contour. And so what I was talking about earlier in terms of trying to see the edges, I know the edge of the head is somewhere around here, but the visual information is all very subtle. It's hard to see where that edge is. So I'm trying to invent that image, and it's really through a feeling, a gut understanding of where that is. I'm going to establish a central axis for the features, and then establish an axis for the eyes that runs perpendicular to that. Measure down, we got the nose, generally a horizontal axis for the mouth. and I'm really, again, this is a little bit different from what I've demonstrated for a long time, is now what I'm doing is essentially creating an armature upon which I'll place various shapes and values and will continue to refine. Usually this happens a bit later on after I've established more of that gesture. Let's see. Oh, Deborah is saying you love yours and you have a traditional one. That's awesome. I've had some trouble using the traditional one, but I know a lot of people that it works very well for, and so. In part, just because I've spent so much time kind of working from life, it kind of requires me to reestablish new habits. And for me, that's the benefit. I feel like we can grow better as artists when we challenge those habits periodically. You know, we learn to embrace those habits and really lock them in and feel the momentum of when we have an effective habit. But we also know when to introduce new ones and shake those up a little bit to help us move forward, right? When we start to challenge those assumptions, and especially if I start to feel like I'm too afraid to try something new, then I know I definitely need to try something new. Because that's for me that's where the excitement comes in. I get a little bored doing the same thing over and over again, but there are times when doing something over and over again is really important for locking that information in and really, like I said, building healthy habits and getting to that point where you don't have to think so much about drawing or painting. It's the thinking that can get exhausting. All right, so at this point you can see this rough kind of gesture, and again, I've chosen this lighter graphite that's barely visible against this light tone that I've established, so I might end up having to go a little bit darker. But I feel like I've got a basic understanding. Now I'm going to move into the angle sighting to compare these basic angles. So if you're new to that term, what I'm doing is I'm closing one eye to flatten my depth perception. I'm actually going to use the larger reference image that I have over here. So I have a small one in front of me, I have a large one next to me. When I close one eye, it flattens my depth perception, so when I hold the pencil out in front of me, it feels like it's sitting directly on top of the image. I can establish the angle, I can find my target. So if I'm looking for this angle in the ear as my target, I find that angle by tilting this into little lines, lock my wrist, carry it in and place it on top of the image. So in front of me, I can see the image that's being captured in the overhead camera. And I can compare the two. So this feels a bit too vertical. I can kind of I can change that up a little bit. And I'm looking for average angles now. These are the big decisions that we're making. And throughout the drawing process, we're going to make the same decisions, but on increasingly smaller areas of the paper. So these are big decisions. We're going to be thinking the same way, just gradually in smaller and smaller ways. So once we've established those big areas, then we move on to smaller areas. I'm finding this angle here that connects the intersection points of the ears, where it intersects the head. Now this step can be really helpful if it's not something that you've done much of with the angle sighting. Where it gets really helpful for me are the areas that are very close to horizontal or close to vertical. So if I look at this ear, for example, it feels generally horizontal. But based on all the other information, the way those angles relate to one another, it can sometimes skew our impression of them. So it may feel like it's actually angled down or angled up when it's actually horizontal. Or maybe it's horizontal, or it feels horizontal when there's actually a slight angle. So I need to constantly check my assumptions, trying to override any sort of kind of calibration our brains might be applying to the form. You know, we're really mostly primed to observe the differences between things. So we notice the variation between angles, the variation between values, more than the absolutes. So it's just something to kind of keep in mind, and all of these tools help us to override that and hopefully help us to become a little bit, I guess, more open-minded, more kind of mentally flexible in terms of how we approach visual information. All right, I need to move things along. We're already 20 minutes in, and this is going to take forever if I keep yapping. So I'm going to keep going. Cheryl saying I get too anxious to get in there and enjoy the process. Well, hopefully that's good that you're able to acknowledge that. And I don't know, perhaps there's a certain amount of anxiety that can be helpful. There can be a certain amount that can be less helpful. So I'm just breaking down the forms a little bit more. When you saw me make these kind of outside edges of the snout, and one of the things that can be helpful is to envision the line, run that long to see where it would intersect other forms. So we're trying to make connections between these kind of shorter segments and other elements. It's all about making kind of connections here. And you can see that I'm making straight lines, not curves. We are going to start with these straight lines and then gradually add more specificity to them to capture the curves to them. So with the ear, for example, I'm going to get that average. I'm not going to worry about the tip there. I'll kind of find that curve later once I've really locked in the height of it. I'm going to look for intersection marks, so where the back here, the shoulder blade comes out, where it enters and exits that ear. And I say that about the straight lines to help you consider your relationship to curves. For me, what happens is if I lead by a kind of a curvilinear gesture, those curves are often not very specific, and I miss the overall axis to them. So I'm trying to establish that axis first, and then we'll apply the curve. And again, using the side of the pencil, it just encourages marks that are a little bit easier to erase. Let those marks run long. I'm looking at some of these shapes here, but do quick check-ins where you are relative to everything else. So if I look at that mark and I carry a line across here, a horizontal guide, I can see where it starts to intersect the mouth. I can compare that to the reference. And so there's a kind of a combination of kind of a gut feel, reacting to the form that's in front of you, and then calculating. And those are kind of two parts of the brain that are active, and we can sometimes it can sometimes lead to very different decisions making when we're in a reactionary mode of thinking versus a calculation mode. So I try to kind of pop in and out and not get locked into any one too much. And so I kind of, it's almost happening simultaneously, trying to fluctuate back and forth between calculating and then reacting. This is a cute little cat, looks like Tybalt. And the cat Rachel's cat at the house. I don't know if you're watching Rachel. Reminds me of Tybalt. Let's see. Oh, Ursula saying I have a difficult time drawing and observing the chat at the same time. Yeah, I have a good, I like to listen to things while I'm working. It gives my conscious brain something to chew on and allows me to just kind of freely work. We had talked about that a little bit in a previous episode. I think it's always fun to see everybody else's your individual relationship between kind of listening versus drawing or painting, what kind of helps get you in the right headspace. The other thing that I can do right now is, because I'm looking ahead to the screen that you're seeing, I can see my drawing and the reference image next to one another. So when I keep my eyes fixed on the reference image, I can observe the action out of my peripheral vision. I can see the angle forming next to it and make some adjustments that way. But I feel like overall we're establishing the basic values, basic shapes, I'm sorry, not values, basic shapes effectively, and I want to start to block in the values. And I find it more helpful to be working from the smaller thumbnail rather than the large one at this stage, to keep myself from really getting absorbed in the details too early before I've established that structure. Now this is where I got my daughter a book on how to draw animals, and it has a bit more information about the structure, really kind of understanding the skull and the anatomy of whatever subject you're studying, in this case the cat. And I feel like that can be very helpful if you have an anatomical understanding of this subject. But if you don't, then my default is to just go back to what I know. I can do angle sighting, I can do comparative measuring, I can look for the central axis, I can think about the big shapes and value relationships. And if I get those right, I can kind of trust that it'll convey a sense of the structure and form underneath it without having to get into the anatomy so much. Like I said, it can be very beneficial to have those things, but at the same time, that can be a way to understand it better, is just to draw it. I mean, that's what Leonardo did, right? Is through the act of drawing, and I think his own anatomical research, you really come to an understanding of how things are structured. There's information about the bone structure, the muscles, etc., of any creature that you're drawing that's conveyed through the edges, the quality of the line, where things get hard or soft, where the light might reflect it a little bit differently. So there are a lot of visual cues that we take in that we can observe and become more sensitive to through the act of drawing. All right, I noticed my voice is starting to give up. We're already only half an hour in, so I may have to do a little less talking. Let's see. I think what I want to do is I need to darken this. I'm shifting my thinking now to the abstract. All right, thinking about balance of light and dark, and intentionally picking up this block. Using the lines that I have really as a guide, as a reference, but I'm also trying to react freshly with this material. You're always contributing to the form, so I'm trying not to think of that. I'm just kind of filling in shapes. I'm trying to think that I'm adjusting the form. Make every mark count is my general motto, thing that's running through my head. And have it say something. This reminds me a bit of kind of pastel painting, working with a block. It's a little bit big for a pastel stick, but it makes me think of that. And I'm intentionally kind of moving around the drawing. Holy, there's a hot mess right now. I looked up at it and yikes. Let's see if we can reclaim this. I think I entered the ugly duckling stage a little early. But that's what makes drawing fun. We'll get it. Sometimes it's the fight over the drawing that gets exciting. It feels like, oh my God, this whole thing could just crumble. All right. Okay, I feel like that's given me kind of a base understanding of the forms, general value relationships. I'm going to do some drawing with the paper towel. Let's see if I can reclaim this to some degree. certainly had some drawings on this show that I've been more satisfied with than others, but I don't know if any of them have been complete disasters. I don't know, but maybe this is the one. And that's where it helps me to have you as participants in my drawing experience, because it helps me to take this lightly. When I'm on my own, I may not be so so accepting of the challenges. All right, I'm gonna put the big guy aside. What do I have here? I think I need the 4B a little bit darker so I can make some of these marks that stand out. Laura's asking, where can I get the reference photo? That's in the description below. So you might have to click like a read more link to show more below the video. And sometimes it's off to the right, sometimes it's below. I don't know quite how YouTube formats things, but it should be in the description along with all the materials that I'm using. Susan, left ear is too far left. So yeah, for everybody, feel free to do what Susan does here, point out things that need correction. It may be a thing that I haven't gotten to, like I haven't done a whole lot of correcting yet, but there's a lot of things that I'm just not paying attention to, right? And so this is where you all come in and you can help me identify things that I might be ignoring, because that's what happens in all of our drawings. We become blind to some of these things, and that's why it's important to have creative partners. So let's see. And then it's saying having problems with the proportions of both ears. Ears should be closer together. And then he is asking how my colored pencil skills are going. Oh, I did. Can I reach it? I can't. I don't know. That's a tinted graphite drawing that I just did, and that's a lot of fun. So I'm getting more comfortable with that. I have a hard time because I spend so much time painting. My brain is just really having a hard time of understanding the color and how to layer them, how to mix them, because I want to treat it like oil paints when they're not. And so that's where I'm running into. But I'm getting close there. Oh yeah, I'd love to. It would be fun to try this out in color. All right, let's do this. Let's get back into it. All right, I'm going to. Okay, so there are definitely some observations about the placement of the ears, so we can adjust now. What I'm going to do, though, in order to make that work, is I'm going to anchor this ear here. I kind of have the ghostly image of this ear, doing a quick check-in to compare this distance to this distance. So it really puts this ear right smack in the middle. So I'm going to set that as my anchor, and then from there adjust the proportions. So if I know that this is the right angle, and then somewhere along this line, this ear is going to be placed, so I need to move up or down along that line. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this measurement and compare it to the gap between. Oh, and that's one ear width. So I can bring that down. And so that brings this ear up here, which seems to align with some of the comments that I was seeing with Lynn. I think it was one of you that called that out. And that's all very helpful. So I appreciate those comments. Keep them coming. And if you're new and you're joining us and you're not really clear on like how to provide comments, just give it a shot. And I'm looking for that type of feedback as an important part of the drawing process, the creative process. That's how we get better as artists, is we find people who are good at giving us the feedback we need, and then we try to grow from there. So something is off here. I think this ear and this eye needs to start over here a little bit more. Find this angle. All right, I'm gonna try to move forward, move through this a little bit faster, so that we can actually get through this drawing in a reasonable amount of time. So it may not have the same level of kind of detail as perhaps my initial study did, but hopefully at least we can get to the point where you're comfortable with the overall structure. So as I'm moving down, one of the things now I need to check are some of the key points and how they relate to one another. So if I look at this chin, for example, I can run a plumb line up through there and see how it relates to the ear. I can use my pencil as a guide to compare that to the reference photo. And I feel like that's pretty darn close. So like the chin is about directly below this kind of base point of the ear. Then we can run a horizontal guide across here, see how it might intersect this paw that he's resting on. As I start to place the ear, I can use this ear as a guide, drop a plumb line down, see where that line would intersect this eye, and it's pretty close to that corner. So making decisions fairly rapidly here. You may find that your pace is a little bit different from mine, but don't worry about that. I tend to be on the faster side of drawing. I always have been. And that has hurt me in many ways, and it's something that I've tried to overcome, is try to force myself to slow down. And I kind of say that just to kind of put out there, like if you do attribute speed to the quality of the drawing, I encourage you not to do that. You're going to work at your own speed, and they're amazing drawings that take forever to complete. They're amazing drawings that come out in a matter of seconds. So if you're focusing on trying to make your drawings faster, or in my case slowing them down too much, then just kind of keep that in mind. At least for me, what I'm looking for is to try to find my own connection with that. Work at the pace that makes sense for my own brain and how I process this information. The term I use is to work at the speed of thought, right? What is a medium? What is a way of using the medium that allows you to translate your thoughts, the pace that your thoughts are developing, to translate on the page? So that if you're thinking very quickly, you're not working in a way that's very slow and tedious and you can't execute on those thoughts. Or vice versa, if you need to slow your thoughts down to take time to study the form, and you're working with a medium that just is inspiring you to move faster, then you may find that disconnect. And so I find that, like, if I try to, as best I can, work with a medium in a way that allows me to synchronize those two, so then I can and keep moving towards that goal of making every mark count. So still using an overhand grip, because I want these marks to kind of float on the surface. And what I'm starting to do now is try to identify the edges. And so we've laid down some lines, and as I follow along those lines, I may kind of visualize the angle, but then fill in the space that leads up to that edge and captures that angle, rather than really draw a hard line that I then kind of color in, essentially. So, the other thing I forgot to mention is that I've been really squinting through most of this drawing so far, letting my eyes lose focus. So I guess I really haven't been squinting. I've been letting them kind of fall out of focus. Mnemonica is saying you have some tinted graphite pencils. Yeah, I do really want to work with them, especially the water-soluble ones. I hope soon that I'll be able to do a drawing with that and actually introduce some water, some brush work, and kind of shake things up a little bit. The other thing that I want to do sometime soon is do another pen and ink drawing. I've only done one, and I'm in the process of exploring some different pens to work with, just to try them out. I believe I used the Derwent line maker pens before, which I thought worked really well. But I'm kind of curious to try out some new ones. But yeah, if anybody else has any suggestions for subject matter or media, so many things that we could do. And there's this kind of dark, patchy shadow area here that I want to kind of just make sure that I'm thinking about in relationship to the rest of the figure. So comparing that to the eye. And I'm almost at the point where I need to start correcting through some subtractive drawing. So using that eraser to remove some information. So just using this 4B still, and I'm able to get a decent range of values, and so just kind of leaning in on it a little bit more when I need more value. I need to drop it down some. When I'm building up these dark layers, I'm intentionally rotating as I go. So there's this back and forth movement, but there's also a twisting in my fingers. And that helps to keep this rounded out. I'm not developing those flat spots. And that also ensures that I have a sharp point to use for some fine details later on. Hopefully it's all coming across well. I mean, like I said, my voice is struggling right now, and after some I should have been more kind as I was goofing around and being loud. So okay, so I'm just kind of thinking through as I'm kind of playing around with my vision a little bit, trying to see the subject in as many ways as possible. So squinting, softening your gaze, and flooding your eyes, opening them wide, will help you to observe different things in the subject. But all of them are like all of those ways of observing will help you to see it as a whole and not get absorbed in the details. So we talk about that a lot in this show, is that, you know, when we bring ourselves into sharp focus, we end up distorting things. That sharp focus is designed for very specific information, things like texture and then fine detail, at the expense of a real understanding of value or color relationships. And so I intentionally keeping that gaze softened so that I understand these big forms and value relationships more effectively at this stage before I get absorbed in the details. Wipe this down. Gonna build it up, knock it down. I want to be careful, especially around the ears. You know what you saw me do here, by just that horizontal mark. It's going to give me trouble later on because it's running parallel to the edge of that ear. And so there's a chance that looking at it, we'll say, well, they're running in the same direction, so they must belong together, and it's going to take that background and bring it forward. If I want to create more depth, I need to have a clear overlap between the two. So if this runs vertically, we can establish the horizontal axis of this ear that cuts through that horizontal mark. And then the viewer will say, all right, well, since this mark and this mark, since they're running in the same direction, they must belong together. And it's different from this one, so that must be separate. And that creates that visual separation to help you create depth. It's a small thing, but it's one of those little things that can really pull a drawing together when you pay attention to the direction of the marks and see how just that directionality can play a role in establishing spatial relationships. So I'm going to do some subtractive drawing. I'm going to keep the marks loose and light. I kind of feel like I want to be more expressive today than otherwise I might, and so this is dangerous here. As I subtract the space behind that ear, I need to be careful of the direction of the marks. And just kind of keep working back and forth. I'm kind of just taking these quick little jabs throughout the drawing. I'm not ready to get into the details. Okay. I'm just taking stock here of the relationship between those ears. And I think I want to see what happens if we just become more expressive with these marks today. I felt like with the preparatory drawing, I got really sucked into the kind of fine details, and as this is coming together, I don't think that's the experience I want to have right now. I want to stay loose and be a bit more expressive. And I am bringing that up to say that, you know, your experience could be entirely different from mine. So if you feel inclined to get in there and render every fur, piece of fur there, or really kind of get in and define those whiskers, for example, then go for it. I'm just trying to connect with the drawing experience I want to have right now. So right now I can start to react to the structure of light and shadow as this head is forming, what's happening back here. This looks different than what I'm seeing in the reference photo, but I kind of like that. And so I might want to kind of lean in on that a little bit more. I said that at the top of the show. I think I feel like I just want to do something a little bit different than what I have been doing. So I'm just going to go with that. Now with the eraser too, again, we're always contributing to the form. So if you're kind of new to drawing and you haven't really considered it, just try to think of the eraser as a drawing tool, right? You're making marks, you're establishing forms. It's not just about lifting material and starting over again. It's this balance between additive and subtractive thinking that helps to pull the whole subject together. That's something that is a significant part of my oil painting process, and so a lot of my approach to drawing is informed by that. And again, you may find your own way as a drawing artist, but I would just kind of encourage you all to consider your relationship to erasers. In a way, I try to think of it as a sculpting tool. It feels more like a brush to me than a way just to correct mistakes. And if you see how it's picking up that material on the side. So what that means is that as I'm laying it flat like this and I'm just gently kind of glancing across the surface, it's blending more than it is lifting. It's just kind of smudging things. And so you can practice controlling the pressure, letting it scrape across the surface of the paper, really bearing down to lift more when you need it. Just kind of tapping to see what it just lifts from that. I'm going to switch to this blending stump. Same thing. Blending stump is an opportunity to contribute to the form. It's not just about smoothing out texture. Now this is already preloaded with some graphite from older drawings. But think about your pressure control, allow it to kind of roll in your fingers to get a variety of marks. Think about kind of sculpting with it, using the tip, using the side of it. The way I like to think about it too is at this point starting to think about the direction of my marks in a way that will help contribute to the form of the subject. So looking at the flow of the fur in particular will help me do that. So you can see that it changes direction. If you look at the direction of the fur here as when it's radiating around the eye, all of that information helps to establish the structure of the head. We're seeing how it wraps around that form. So again, this is that information that we can glean from just what's happening on the surface that tells us about what's happening underneath. And so as I look at these stripes too, it starts to be an opportunity to express those, thinking about that and just kind of using the side of it. And it's these kind of short marks. So if you're thinking of two things when you're looking at the stripes, these dark areas. There's the direction of that dark stripe, say along here, but then there's the direction of the fur, right? So I'm kind of moving and making the big movements that follow the direction of the mark in that dark area, but I'm creating these soft kind of vibrations that align with the direction of the fur. And that starts to then help me suggest the texture. And I can use that to my advantage later on as I want to create more kind of refinement in the areas of fur. Hopefully that makes sense. I'll make it. Oh my gosh, I gotta get back. I forgot all about the chat. I gotta check that. And then Cheryl's got a good point. Learning tones first makes one a better painter. Yeah, it's tricky. It's interesting. I want to get back to that because that's been on my mind a lot lately, and I have some thoughts that I'd love to kind of throw at you all. Then to see. Oh, Monica's got the water-soluble ones. Awesome. Pen and ink. Cool. Oh, Bramble, you're going to be doing Inktober. Awesome. Very cool. Yeah, that's a cool thing. If you're not familiar with Inktober, it escapes me the artist that really kind of pulled that all together. But it's become this really cool event where pen and ink artists share their work, and really focus on that as a medium. For October. Very cool. It's such an interesting medium. Michelle, I like to draw a runner because I'm getting ready to run a marathon in November. Yikes, way to go. I cannot imagine. I've done a few triathlons in my life. Not any time recently, but those were hard, and I cannot imagine a marathon, so I hope that goes well for you. And then Nia is saying Winsor & Newton fine liners. Oh, okay, I should check those out. Let's see. And then Nia, I'm sorry to hear about the kind of the health issues you might be having with charcoal. So we talked a bit about that last episode as well. So it is, I think with all materials, I think it's helpful to be cognizant of the risks associated with health, making sure you have proper ventilation, and that if you're working with pigments, that you're aware of how they could be absorbed in the skin and cause trouble later on. It's something that I definitely need to be working on more. But we've, as artists, there's been years where there's been mindsets that, it's somehow paying attention to material safety can stifle creativity. But I would just encourage everyone to make your health a priority. So yeah, let me see about switching to pen and ink there. Oh, Sandra is saying the forehead stripe pattern is said to be the touch of Muhammad and M. I'd never heard that. That's an interesting bit of history there. All right, so at this point, I'm really just shifting my thinking to these edges, and then we'll continually refine them as we go. And then even 5183N, pet portraits are harder than portraits of people. I don't know about that, because I think portraits of people is wicked hard. So, yeah, but I see where you're coming from. I have a great admiration for those who are good and effective portrait artists. What a skill. All right, let's see. I don't know. Sometimes I just make marks that I don't really know what I'm thinking. They're kind of subconscious. Let me switch to this 10B. Let's see. Troy is they're not allergies. It does sound like that. I did damage to my vocal cords because I was goofing around, making very loud noises, and I felt something get hurt when I did that, and I'm like, oh, that's not smart of me. All right, so as we move into refinement, you can see those initial lines are all but gone. I'm still going to use the side of the pencil. I find the side of the pencil just more effective for me to create texture rather than switching to the tip, which inspires me to essentially create each individual strand of hair here. But if I move on its side, I can create these fine lines and these broad areas that start to feel more naturally formed, rather than as lines. And so I've got this overhand grip, and it allows me to control it by rolling it this way. I can lay it down flat to create a more broad area, and as I need to create more fine areas, I just kind of roll up a little bit. And if I need to kind of work up to the tip, I can kind of lean on that a little bit. And I think about that as I'm working on the ear. We see these white hairs in the ear. I'm kind of lifting and pulling into that area to try to suggest those. Sorry, I'm kind of dipping into the shot there. And then my general approach to texture is to lead by the contrast, light and shadow. Try to think about big areas and observe as I go what information my brain is filling in. I'm trying to leverage the natural inclination for the mind to make sense of all of this information. And if we get the light and shadow right, we'll start to imagine and understand the texture, even though it's not all there. So same with what I was doing earlier. As I build up these layers, allowing the pencil to roll in my fingers to avoid creating those flat spots that can be troublesome. I'm just trying to think through ways in which I can suggest more than make explicit. But again, that's kind of being driven by how I feel about it today. This is the type of experience that I want. when I worked on the preparatory drawing, it was more in a mindset that I wanted to create more detail, more refinement, right? And now I want to be a little bit more expressive with my marks, because that's just the day I'm having. So think about, as you're kind of establishing these textures, there's the marks that you're pulling and you're pushing and lifting, you're pulling and dragging, and then you may end up with a combination of the two to really make it all feel integrated. So what that's doing is affecting the relationship between the positive and negative space in those marks that you're making. So you're adding these marks, but whether you push or pull affects that negative space into which that mark is kind of inserting itself. And so by combining the two, pushing and pulling and kind of alternating between them, it helps to unify the positive and negative space a little bit more. So trying to think about kind of aligning the pencil with the direction that the fur is flowing in at that point. So you can see it kind of like rotating it around. Here I can't really get around this way, so I have to kind of switch directions, but I'm trying to align the core, the lead, with the direction of the fur, make these fine marks, and let that build the overall shape. So I apologize for the issues with my my voice today. Next week it should all be back to normal. Hopefully you're able to understand what I'm saying. And I'm intentionally kind of leaving the eyes for now. I'm trying to set the stage for them by focusing on the space around it, some of the texture around it. Just playing around with texture. Now, at this stage too, I'm also kind of moving in and out of focus. So bringing into sharp focus, but then also letting my eyes soften to try to observe the whole, right? So what I saw happening here is that there was a bit too much contrast and it was creating too much division on the page. So then I try to unify it by just kind of creating a value wash, just kind of building up a light layer across that whole area. So the same thing is happening in here. There's just too much contrast between light and dark. So I can kind of just lay down a little bit of tone to soften that a bit. Focus just a little bit. But I think that, yeah, to me that's become such a big part of the drawing process, is to be constantly going in and out of the drawing into a small area, focusing, broadening to see the whole, and back in and back out. And that kind of plays into the concept I was talking about earlier about working at the speed of thought. That becomes one of the thoughts. It affects the speed. You know, if you make that transition slowly, or if you make that very quickly, that all becomes part of your individual sensibility as an artist, and it could have, influence the medium you're using, the choice of medium, or how you're using that medium. I'm just getting it in there to get some of these finer details. So as I look at the edge of the ear here, I'm looking at that edge and placing my pencil along that edge, but then pulling away. So rather than drawing a line, I'm creating a shape. and starting to create a sense of atmosphere in this that I find kind of interesting, and I might play with that a little bit more. One of the things that is also occurring to me now too is that I'm letting the tone build up on the page, and so I'm going to have an opportunity to lift out some brighter highlights. And so I'm kind of starting to prepare for that mentally. And these edges here along the nose are really fascinating, where you see these dark areas and how they kind of feather out at the end and they become sharper in some other areas. But as you're working along the nose, try to think of the plane here. You know, we're moving up at an angle, and then it's kind of this more horizontal curve across here, and then back down along in here. And you know, so the first step is just to become aware of that, and then let that influence the marks that you're making, so you can reinforce the cross contour information. The contour being the outer edge of an object, a line that represents the edge of a three-dimensional object. The cross contour marks are the marks within that edge, within the form, that help to establish its three-dimensional qualities. All right. Oh, I see some comments here. Wait. Nia is saying, have you found an ideal solution for neck, back, and shoulder pain from too much stooping while drawing? I see a chiropractor to help me with that. For a long time, this shoulder would just be in screaming pain because it all stems from the way my hips are rotated when I'm seated like this. And so it might be helpful to talk to somebody who really understands how your body is structured, to know where all of that pain might be stemming from. And I don't know enough of it to be specific, but I do know that from hearing from other artists that stand for a long time, having like a 2x4 on the floor just to allow one leg to raise can be helpful for them. Moving around a lot, trying to stay loose, trying to keep my head over my shoulders as much, so I'm not leaning forward, because this guy's heavy right now, and that makes everything a mess. But those are some really good questions, and I know what you mean, because you have definitely experienced noticeable pain and discomfort when I'm not paying attention to my posture while working. Okay. All right, Susan, just reading your comments here. Thank you. Yeah, and Wilma makes a good point about standing at an easel. This is actually less comfortable for me, but it's more suitable for the show. But when I'm painting, I'm generally working at an easel, working vertically, and so I can kind of shift around a bit more. Often it's the chair and finding the right chair when I'm seated that makes a big difference. And then it's encouraging me to move forward, which is challenging. And if I could lean back more, that would be better. SU is asking, how do I get the idea for each drawing? I do a lot of image searches. For a long time, I was taking my own reference images, but I kind of ran out of time to do that. It gets so time consuming. So I do a lot of image searches on free sites like Unsplash or Pixabay. And I try to vary it. So that's some of what plays into my decision making is, we're working in a series now. I'm doing 3 pet portraits, but generally I try to alternate. Maybe do a landscape one week, a portrait, a still life, and then an animal, or we'll try to vary that up. And then I try to vary it up between charcoal or graphite, and try to maybe introduce some additional media. But within that, then one of the things that I look for is the balance of light and dark, and what photograph will give me the visual information I need to effectively build a drawing. If you look at, say for example, photos from magazines of models, that light is often flat, and when translating into a drawing, it becomes really difficult. It becomes very flat because so much is conveyed through the color contrast, for example. And so then I'll often look for more dramatic lighting than I might otherwise. And so I try to think about it first on an abstract and design level, and then the subject, if that makes sense. Like, so just find things that make pleasing compositions and have a good arrangement of light and darks, and then I go try to vary up the images. And I often work in batches, so I'm in the process now of working through November's images, and so I'll do a collection of them, find the ones that I think are the strongest, and then schedule those out. And then I do a preparatory drawing before each episode just to better understand the subject, and hopefully make the drawing on camera go a little bit more quickly. But yeah, so I'm in the process. I think next week I want to do, well, next week I'm doing this one here, this parakeet. So that's the last one in the pet projects series, and then after that we're going to get back to landscape working. But that's where I want to kind of experiment. So I really like to work on toned paper, so it's been a while since I've done that. So I might do that. So working both additively and subtractively with black and white charcoal. All right, where am I now? Okay. Karen Lee 29, the serial toning, erasing, and blending have been a revelation to me. I must have been living under a rock for 80 years. I don't know. It's just a different way, and I guess this is generally the way I was taught to draw. I don't know. I don't really know. I mean, I think it was largely influenced by my undergrad time at MICA, learning from a lot of really great painters. And so that's where this has kind of influenced my mark making and the way I approach drawing probably the most. But I hope that what you take away from this whole thing is that the objective in drawing is to connect you with your body and you to the image you're making and the subject, right? It's all about bringing that all together and finding your own path through that, developing your own sensibility with regards to mark making and structure, and part of that is trying things out with the way other people work. So I encourage you always to find other artists and instructors that you can kind of pick and choose certain things from each of them, see how they navigate the process. I just, I kind of cringe at the idea that there is one way to draw, because to me that sucks the joy out of it and out of the potential. Ideally, there are infinite ways to draw that we each find our own connection to. So, and that's the real benefit of it. I like the idea that drawing is something that we as humans can all benefit from, and I hope that there are people out there that do it because they love it, and kind of override any voices that say, well, if you're drawing, you must be an artist, and that you have to take on everything that comes with it. Right? We all have our own association with that, and we can all benefit, and if it helps you to call yourself an artist, if it helps you to not call yourself an artist, and do what works for you. But I've seen too many people that just don't draw because they say they're not an artist. So you have to be an artist to be as a prerequisite to draw. You can draw and you don't have to share it with anybody. You can do it just for yourself, and that's where, you know, I keep coming back to the earliest cave paintings, you know, perhaps the most inspirational things out there, because they were created without the institution of the art world. Again, kind of stepping back to try to observe this relationship, because what happens in here is this falls into shadow, and within that shadow we see variations of light and dark. And if you focus on that area, what you'll be more attuned to is the contrast between light and dark, not the totality of that shadow area. So that, again, that's why it's really helpful sometimes to go in and out in terms of your focus, to try to capture all of it. And now as I'm considering the edges, there's an instinct to draw a line here, right, along that contour. And I'm going to try to avoid that, and instead just look at that edge, try to identify the path, and create my marks that touch along that path. Heather is saying, I'm having a terrible time with this one. I'm not able to get any raised angle on my sketchbook, so I'm right on top of my paper. No clipboard either. Super awkward. My proportions are wrong. Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. That's really helpful, because I don't know if anybody's checked out Heather's work. It's pretty amazing stuff. So, yeah, really nice drawing stuff, and it's good to hear that artists like you struggle as well. And yeah, I would love to get out to California. That sounds great to me. Oh, and then Sandra is asking, where may I download the reference photo? If you find it in the link below, I think you can just right-click and save it. I'm not actually sure. I'll have to try that out. I think if you bring up the reference photo, you should be able to just right-click and then save it to your desktop. But if not, I did put the photo credit on Unsplash, so you can go to Unsplash and go to that artist's page and download it from there, various sizes. Some really nice work, and the artists there provide it free for commercial use. All right, what am I doing now? Okay, I think it's time for the eyes. That's starting to mess me up. All right, so what am I doing? I'm trying to orient myself, so before I really commit to any marks, I'm just kind of taking a stab at, oh, that's so weird, taking a stab at this curve. This is where, again, there can be a disconnect between the literal truth and the optical truth. And so as I look at this curve, like, it feels like it's doing one thing when it's literally doing something else. Like, so if I look at this section of the curve where it wraps around the eyeball, it actually has kind of a backward slant to it. And that's messing with my head. So, because I feel like it should be kind of more like this, but it's kind of rotated like that. And so then it tilts that angle back more. That's really, really fascinating. Again, trying to just break that down into these sections, straight marks. And then what I'm observing here is that some of that eyeball is obscured by the fur that's on top of it. So there's kind of an angle there, and an angle here. And then of course this one here. All right, and then there's, I'm going to lift up some of the highlight there. And this is where I'm switching to the tripod grip to get a nice solid edge. But be careful not to outline that highlight. Try to just build your marks right up to the edge of the highlight. I've just found in the past when I've outlined it first, it can sometimes remain visible and then it flattens it out. So now that's kind of too strong right there. So I'm just gonna kind of knock it down with the finger, kind of smudging it. And kind of like the expression of the eye. So I'm going to leave that for now. I might come back to it. And then I'm going to do the same thing here. Try to establish the primary angles. Yeah, and I'm kind of digging what's happening here, and so I'm going to let that sit. We're only about an hour and 20 minutes in, so we have some time to continue to work on it. And I might request some input from you as to where I refine further. So let me get a little bit farther along in this. Let's see. Oh, Michelle's asking, are you so excited for the whiskers? I was just thinking that. You beat me to that. No, I'm not excited for the whiskers. But I'll show you. I think we'll get there. I think we got it. I know it's a very intimidating thing, so I'll talk through some of the strategies that I have. Oh, then Monica's saying about the reference image. Once you open up the link, just right-click it and save it where you want to. Awesome. And they're saying, thanks for the support, feeling like I can't draw anything well these days. And then Greg, throwing in your support. That's awesome. Hello from Ireland. That's awesome. Welcome. All right, Wilma, thank you for the comments. Yeah, those slumps, I definitely know what you're experiencing there, and I think we all kind of go through them. The thing that I have to remind myself a lot is that it often means that you're on the brink of moving forward. You know, it's never a linear progression for improvement. You're going to have plateaus. You're going to have these rapid increases. And what I've noticed reflecting back on my work, what happens is my work is actually plateauing. My kind of sensibility is improving, right? Like my expectations are gradually increasing. So while the work is plateauing, my expectations are increasing, so it's creating a differential between those two. So that's what leads to the dissatisfaction. But if you find that it's inhibiting it any way, it can be helpful to kind of step back and reflect and say, is it really as uncomfortable, as bad as I think it is? Or if I just raise my expectations and my work is in the process of getting there, right? So like I said, that's just how I kind of rationalize that in my head sometimes. And I've had some more kind of challenging moments throughout my time as an artist, and so I get it. But hopefully it's the thing where you look back and you're like, wow, that was a really valuable time for me. So I'm kind of switching to this overhand grip to kind of loosely suggest the flow and the structure of the hairs here in the ear. And I'm trying to think about a kind of a rhythm to the marks and not getting into a repeated pattern. Here, I'm just gonna see what happens. If I think linearly in some areas, so use this contour line. So rather than drop the value here, I'm gonna use that line to increase the clarity of that edge. So veering from that reference photo a little bit. And it can be helpful if you're struggling with that. This is an area where, again, it took me a long time, and I'm finally starting to understand that it can be helpful to establish before you start drawing or painting, like where is that threshold in terms of accuracy for you? Because that can change throughout the drawing or the painting, right? You may start and say, I want to be loose and expressive like I did, and I may pivot and say, now I need to go tight and detailed. But I think the more you can kind of identify what flexibility you have in terms of being 100% accurate to the reference, and what your threshold is, if you can identify that, it makes some of those decisions easier to make. And so if you're so inclined to feel like it has to be 100% accurate, then you have that criteria. You could say, well, it's not, and I need to get there, or you have hit it, right? And if you're evaluating it based on a 50% accuracy to the reference photo, then you don't have to sweat some of these things. You can say, well, it's within the threshold I established for myself, and I'm gonna focus more on the expressive quality of the marks or something. If that makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense. All right. So as I contemplate this, what we're looking at here is we see kind of the top of the head here. We see this very thin sliver here that represents the back of the neck, and then we move up into the kind of the shoulder blades area here. And it's hard to tell that visual distance. This is out of focus in the reference image, and that gives us some information. We see here that change in pattern shifts right in this area, and then it changes again here. So again, all very subtle, but we're looking for those little clues about what's happening in each of those sections as it recedes back into space. And in the reference photo, this shoulder blade is more visible. And so one option I have for myself is to draw a line here, but then I run the risk of that projecting forward and losing that depth. So what I might do is darken this a little bit to create a little bit more visibility of that edge, and then actually use my line work here. So kind of invent line work to help bring the head forward. So these are some kind of abstract decisions that are being made in service of the composition and the structure, but it affects how we interpret the reference photo, not replicate it. Randomness. Just joined a random live. Will you please tell me a joke? Oh my gosh, no. It's so funny. Like, it's one of those things is like, when somebody asks me to tell a joke, I think a lot of people are like this. When somebody asks me to tell a joke, it just goes away from my head. Whereas like randomly throughout the day, jokes will pop in there. But I'll do it. If one pops to my mind, I'll say it. But I can't guarantee it. But I'll do my best. That's a good question. Let's see. MM really likes soft edges. Learning a lot. Still drawing in the studio. I'll get there. All right. You're welcome. Brent does art. Says I nailed the eyes. That's awesome. Thank you. Yes, Michelle called that out. So Gigi, we have a series called Painting Together. We just did a limited series with Gigi Chen, and that's on artistnetwork.com, and so you can find it there under the video section. But she did a painting of a cat, if you're interested in checking that out. I'll try to post a link to that later, if I remember. So I'm kind of shifting to the background, in part to define this a bit more, but it also I'm kind of just sharpening the pencil, and it gives me kind of a place to vent a little bit. I don't have to think so clearly, like sharply, when I'm just building up areas of tone here. There's less calculation going on. It's when we're in that calculation mode that we can get really exhausted. And so yeah, I'm kind of shifting out of that mode and trying to kind of sharpen the pencil so I can get into some of that fine detail a little bit later. What am I doing here? Let's see. I think what I need to do is establish a bit more of this perspective. So what am I going to do? I'm going to actually, I'm going to erase. There's a little bit of light that comes down through here that I really like the way that breaks up the edge. So I'm going to erase that down. And then what happens is this is too flat, so we're seeing a disconnect between the perspective of this plank and then the arm. It doesn't feel like it's sitting on there. So what I want to try to do is add a little bit more information. So establishing some of the knots in the wood, for example. To see if it makes that board feel a little bit more solid. So just using the side of the pencil, letting it roll on my fingers, kind of just creating these loose marks that are not all that accurate, but I'm just trying to take in some of the visual cues from the reference, and mostly like the slope of the angle, kind of reacting to it. Trying to study the softness of the edge, and then move the marks in the direction of the fur. So you can see that this motion for me, I'm really locking my wrist, and it's all coming from the shoulder. And it's just these quick vibrations. So one thing to practice if you haven't done that, if you're having trouble with your pressure control, is to use this overhand grip and try 3 different marks. One where you're really bearing down on the ends, you're doing these quick, I'll use the back of this here. This is part of my upcoming book. So I have a book coming out. I'm going to hopefully be able to announce that in a couple months. We'll start to offer pre-orders for that, but it'll be coming out in the middle of next year. But this is the 3 exercises from that to help with your value control. So as we work with these washes, you can see the difference when you bear down on the ends versus lifting up at the ends and putting more emphasis in the middle, and then try to make it nice and even. Right? And where you put your pressure on those marks can have a big impact on your ability to capture texture, line work, etc. Because when I'm making these kind of fur marks, I'm using the side of the pencil, I'm dragging and lifting and scooping. It's this kind of rocking motion. And so being aware of where your pressure is along the full length of each stroke can really move you along. All right, and it's often something that's not really considered. We so focus on like creating outlines and controlling proportions, but sometimes it's the little things of putting your pressure on the ends, putting your pressure in the middle, trying to make an even mark that can really help you. So if you're like in a place where you're just able to kind of practice mark making or doodling or something, that can be an exercise that can sometimes be helpful just to build that hand-eye coordination and pressure control. And so when I'm making all of these really quick marks, there's an awareness of where the pressure is in those marks. Like, am I heavy on the ends? Am I heavy in the middle? It's kind of what I'm thinking about. And as you practice that, you can really speed up your drawing. You can make those decisions and adjustments very rapidly. And it might feel cumbersome initially as you're really focusing on each stroke, but I think very quickly you'll develop a sense of control over your materials. that comes in handy. So we're looking for the grain of the wood. And I'm thinking about how those lines are going to radiate out a little bit. There's a bit of perspective. So if you look at the linear aspects of this composition, they seem to radiate out from a point that's off in the distance up here. But if we treat them all as parallel, so if I were to establish this angle and apply that angle over here, you can see how that would really conflict. It would flatten things out. Instead, that line angles in more like this. And so it's that change in angle, again, that differential I talked about earlier, that we really respond to. So in terms of creating depth, it's that differential between the angles that conveys the information about the depth and perspective. I gotta move things along a little bit. All right, now time to switch back to this eraser. I've kind of let this whole thing just kind of build up. You can see how dirty my hands are because I haven't been very cautious. I haven't been very precious with the white of the paper, but that just allows me to lift off some of the highlights. So, Jean or Jean, Cedequist, plumb lines from outer edges of ears to the eyes. Yeah, so down here, what do we have? Oh, you got that. Thank you for calling that out. So what I'm looking at, what is being called out is this relationship between the eyes and that ear. And what I think happened is that this part here migrated over to the right because this angle is off a bit. So what am I going to do? I'm going to wipe that out. Got my eraser. And then I can bring that in, so just to reestablish that a little bit. I don't know if that's any better, maybe a little bit, I don't know. But I feel like that's probably close enough. Gonna bring that ear out a little bit more. Okay, back to this. So I've got my rubber eraser here, and you can see I've taken a razor blade and I've shaved it down into this wedge. That gives me that sharp edge that I can use. So I can use it this way to create a broad stroke. I can use it this way to create a broad stroke. I can create a sharp edge this way, and I can roll it onto the corner for a fine point. So it just gives me a little bit more variety in terms of the mark I can make. Cheryl is, I do have a website. I think it's listed in the description below. ScottMaierArt.com. I think I don't update my website nearly enough. I think I just have links to the playlist here. But I haven't sold these demos right now. They just kind of pile up, or we hang them up in the offices here. I give them away. But I do sell work from time to time. All right, so as I'm going through now, this is a way for me to enhance the texture through a subtractive process with the eraser. And because I have this sharp edge here, I can use that to reference the flow, the grain of the fur. Now, one of the things that I think I want to enhance is the contrast in light and shadow. So this is more in shadow than this, and it's all very subtle, but I can kind of tell the lights on this side are a little bit more intense than this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by enhancing the lights here, because if I make them as light as I can go, then I can adjust these accordingly. If I come in here and I make these too light, then I can't go light enough on this side, then I'm just kind of limited. I'm going to have to go back to this area and reestablish it. So now I'm kind of going through and getting my lightest lights established. And you're just using a light pressure just kind of giving the eraser a bit of a vibration that follows along the flow of the fur. And so starting with that light pressure, the first pass is just going to kind of blend the material, but it can sometimes add some subtle texture. And then where I know I need to lift more, I can just lean in on it just a bit more to pull out some greater detail. But what's most critical at this point is understanding the flow of that fur. And now as we come up to the top of the head, again, we're conveying a sense of depth here. There could be 4 inches or so of depth between this part and this part. And it's all in a very small part of the page. And so what conveys that depth is how frequently there are shifts in each of these kind of bands across there. And so I'm spending a little bit more time there, even though it's a very small portion of the drawing. The example that always comes to mind, I don't know if anybody has seen Frederick Church's Niagara Falls painting. I think he's done a couple of them, but there's one in particular where he's looking across the horseshoe of the falls there, and it's all very narrow, and you come across the rim of the falls, and then you're going back down the Niagara River, and you see these distant trees and then these distant clouds, and all in the vertical distance of about an inch. You're going back in depth, back in space, miles, right? And so he's taken all of that information and he squished it into this little area, and that totally transformed how I observe depth and how I think about depth on the surface. I encourage you all to kind of check that out if you're so inclined. So just kind of staying on this area. Well, there's a little bit of light that's catching on the eyebrow here. And I'll try to do, and actually I'll come back later and get those long eyebrow whisker things. So yeah, intentionally I'm going to leave this a little bit darker. Let's see if I just do light lines, will that suggest texture without lifting the value too much? I don't know. And right in here it gets really light. And then there's there's this underlying structure behind the whiskers where you see those little dark patches at the base of each whisker, and there's almost like these ridges. Actually, I'm going to come back here and lift off some of the light on the fur coming out of the ears, and it's just kind of catching on the tip, so I'm going to suggest that there. And then I want to bring this edge of the ear forward a little bit out of that dark. I think I need to do the same thing over here. Create that light ear. Yeah, I don't know how much more I actually want to do on this drawing, because I do kind of like some of the unfinished qualities, but there's a balance to that. You know, there's like a level of unfinished that feels complete, and then there's a level of unfinished that feels unfinished, and it can be very subjective. So I have to kind of evaluate it just based on how it feels. Let's see. Nia is asking when and where can we pre-order the book? So it's going to be available for pre-order in around January, I believe. And so I'm working on some promotional materials for that. So I'll make sure everybody stays updated on that. It's good to hear. Thank you, Wilma, for those thoughts there. Greg is saying my voice sounds like Matthew McConaughey today. That's awesome. I could only wish. I appreciate the comments, Wilma, about selling the drawings. I'll put that into consideration. Lita C, would you review the steps to contour the nose? Mine looks flat. And then Cindy Bates is saying, is that a square eraser? What brand? I had a round one. What's his name? I don't know this cat's name, but if that's his you're talking about. This is the Derwent retractable eraser that I've been using, and it is square. I'm actually on my second one, and I just kind of shave it to that sharp kind of chisel tip. Tombow makes this mono zero eraser, and I have a rectangular one, but they also make a circular one for some of those fine details. And I use both of them, but for different reasons. I feel like this lifts a little bit more material because it's softer, but because it's softer, you get a little less precision. And so it's kind of a trade-off. And I end up using both of them, but just at different times. So today I haven't really used it. And then I have this is the Derwent Slim Eraser that I actually haven't really used much today. It's kind of stuck in the, there we go. But again, I do the same thing, kind of shave it down, and that allows me to create kind of broad areas and lift there. The other erasers that I really like are the Vanish erasers. They're these ones here. So these are Jerry's, these Accurate Vanish eraser that I get from Jerry's. Really nice stuff. It's soft again, so it's kind of can be a trade-off sometimes between precision and then how much it can actually lift. But that's where I just end up carving the erasers down to give myself the precision if I need it. All right, now let's see. I need a little bit more lift here. But I feel like in the previous drawing, I drew too much attention to the mouth, I mean. And I need to really figure out how to make that work. Okay, let's see. Yeah, I love these erasers. Oh, Karen Lee 29. Oh. Yeah, it's interesting. I think subtractive drawing becomes a really important process for me. But again, you will all find a different way, and different instructors have different approaches. I think what I want to do is down in here, I need to create a little bit more emphasis and structure down in here. And so that's one of the other things I like about this is I can extend it and I have this sharp edge that I can use to create kind of fine lines if I need it. And so I'm just, again, the initial pass with the eraser is very light, and then so it just kind of adds a little bit of directionality to some of the marks, so it kind of blends it a little bit. And then if you need to lift more, you just kind of lean in on it a bit more. All right, I think what I want to do now, looking at it just as an abstract design, I'm looking for the balance between light and dark, between sharp edges and soft edges, to feel like there's a flow, there's a balance, and that can be very kind of subjective, and you may end up wanting to balance your image differently than mine. But that's where I'm at right now, is trying to think through some of that. I feel like, all right, I feel like the gesture of it all is pretty effective. This will need a little bit more work. But I don't know as if I need additional work here. I don't know if it's really going to enhance the drawing. Whereas this, I feel like, will at least enhance the structure a little bit, make it a little bit more clear. So what I'm going to do is kind of sharpen this edge with the eraser. And then I'm going to refine with the darks a little bit later. All right, well, let's get to those whiskers, huh? Let's just do it. All right, so, oh, and then the name of the man who did the Niagara Falls drawing. So you're looking for Frederick Church. He's a great Hudson River painter. So look up Frederick Church. There's, Niagara painting. And then, let's see, the erasers, with these Derwent erasers, you should be able to find at, Jerry's or Blick or most stores, but yeah, you should be able to find if you go to the Drawing Together page on artistnetwork.com, there is a link to a Blick page where you can order materials. I don't know if this one is on it specifically, but, and then I use Pentel Click Eraser, a 3-pack at Walmart. And you shave aside and keep the whole because I need to, yeah, that's awesome. That's a really cool, I don't know that eraser, but I'll have to check that out. All right, Nia and Wilma, yeah, buying art materials sure is tricky. It can get expensive. For sure. All right, I think now, all right, let's get to those whiskers. All right, this is where the sharp retractable eraser comes in handy. I'm just gonna kind of clean it off a little bit on the side here on the board. I'm just making a mess of it. It did nothing to clean it. It's just this hot mess right here. Oh well. All right. I think it's fine, a sharp enough point. So I'm just gonna find that edge. The first thing I want to do is figure out first, where is that whisker going to originate, where is it going to end, right? And then try to visualize that. So I just start with a light touch, like I said, and then just bear down as I need to. And there I got a whisker. Now, if you need to sharpen it, grab a kind of a harder one. So this is the 4B. It's not the 6B that I've been using. And you can start to kind of carve into it a little bit more to make it a little bit sharper. But it's a fine line between overstating that edge and understating it, right? So I just, when I try to refine that edge there, I just try to make sure that that line is not too intense, that it's just kind of closing the gap that I created with the eraser just a touch, right? And that's only if I feel like that line is too intense. And I think there is a trick to the pressure a little bit where, I'm not bearing down as much as just moving it a lot. I'm not, because if I bear down, what it does is it ends up just flattening the eraser and it creates a wider mark. But if I keep it a light touch but move it along that same path enough, it will eventually kind of lift off enough of the material to suggest the whiskers. So that's a little bit heavy, a little bit thick, but that's all right. If I need to, I can find some areas just to kind of close that gap a little bit. Again, using a pencil that's a little bit harder than that area. So like if I use the 10B for this dark, I'm using the 4B to close in the gap. and just as with every other aspect of the drawing, kind of sneak up on it. Do a little bit here, a little bit there, rather than one continuous line, which will end up flattening things out. And see if that conveys a sense of the whiskers effectively. All right. Whew. And then if there's like this one is a little bit more visible, maybe enhance that a little bit more with the line. And then Cindy Winter is saying, shouldn't the muzzle be whiter? It very well could be. This is as white as I can go, though. So then my question is do I need to go darker in the areas around it? This is the area I mentioned earlier. It's going to trip me up a little bit. So I need to spend a little bit more time on it. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this 4B. It's a little bit softer than my 10B, and I want to sneak up on it a little bit, add a little bit more kind of refinement in the marks, and kind of sharpen in some of these other areas. So because I can't go lighter here, the only way to create that contrast and create the impression of it being whiter is to go darker in the areas around it. But I need to be careful with that, because then I could end up, if I have too much contrast, it's going to flatten it out. I'm going to lose the structure. But those are really good observations, so keep them coming. So I'm at the point where I have to make decisions about where I add additional refinement. And where I want to just kind of leave things as suggested. So by darkening that space around here, it starts to make it a little bit lighter. Again, because value is not something that we can interpret in isolation. We really only understand value as a relationship, but it's the contrast between the two that helps us to see that. That's what makes value really so fascinating. The same with simultaneous contrast, when we understand the relationship between colors when we're painting. And so the way our cones and our rods operate, with red-green is observed on the spectrum. So when we see a red object, our cones are actually responding not just to that individual wavelength, but the differential between that red wavelength and green. And that's what's really kind of fascinating, is that biologically, that's the way our eyes work, is by observing a differential in color and value. Oh, and you just Nia is saying you just got one of these things, huh? One of these pencil sanders. And these are pretty cool. So these are great little sanding blocks that help to refine the point, to make a nice fine point. Let's see. Some light into the cat's pupils. Karen Lee, 29. Yeah, I wonder. So that's a really good question. So when I lifted that highlight earlier, it was too strong, and it almost felt like it was breaking up the form. I didn't really understand it as a sphere. So it seemed to work better by actually lowering the intensity of that light. But I agree, like there's something to like an intense highlight that can sometimes make the eyeballs feel more volumetric. Let's see what happens. Maybe that works, I don't know. All right, Karen Lee 29, thank you. And then Wilma's saying, what makes this photo reference so inviting to me is the posture of the cat resting on his head on his paw. It just draws me in, and now to Scott's drawing of the image. That's awesome. Yeah, that's the reason I chose this image again, because it's, you know, it's in service of the pet portrait competition. So you'll find a link to that in the description as well as the top of the chat. So we have this new, it's called Best in Show competition on Artist Network, and I wanted to select a pose and a photograph that I could see myself taking. Right, like I'm not quite this good of a photographer, but it's like it doesn't look like it's staged, right? It looks like a very natural pose for this cat. The lighting looks like it's natural. It just looks like this photographer did a really good job capturing it. And so if you end up working from a photograph of your own pet, it might end up being something like this. So part of it is how do we make the most out of an average photo? How do we make the drawing feel like there's something to it? Like I said, I don't consider this an average photo because I think it's a much nicer one than I would have taken. That's why I chose it. But at the same time, I'm trying to make the drawing stand on its own as apart from the photograph. And again, I think we all have our own sensibility with that regard. Like how do we want a drawing that looks just like a photograph, or do we use the photograph as a launching point for a drawing, which becomes its own thing? All right, so just adding a little bit more information here and there. And what I find is that, you take an area like this that is largely unrefined, and you add just a few quick marks, and it can sometimes pull it all together. I don't think I necessarily did that here, but kind of play around with that, like a kind of a minimalist approach to adding kind of fine marks. And in this case, because it's a harder pencil, the contrast, the value contrast of these marks is a little bit lower. And so it has the effect of kind of sharpening more than darkening, if that makes sense. So we kind of maintain a kind of a similar kind of look and feel to what we're already establishing, but sharpening up the edges just a touch. And I'm thinking about, you can see I'm just kind of jabbing into these small areas rather than staying in one spot. This is where I think, this is what I want to do. All right, so these little gaps between the toes here, taking the side of the pencil and trying to create a natural looking mark, not a line, because a line has the potential to divide the subject too much. We talk about that quite a bit in this series, is what a line represents. Generally, the line represents the edge of a three-dimensional object. So if I draw a line within a form, it becomes visually confusing, even if we're not consciously aware of it. We look at that line and interpret it as the edge of an object, when it should be actually a texture, a shadow that's on the form that reinforces the form of the subject. And so that's why we have to be really careful with how we use lines. Lines can be really effective at sharpening and creating expression and doing all sorts of things. But it also has the potential to fracture the form when we interpret it as the edge of something when it actually should be a part of the contour. Hopefully that makes sense. So one of the benefits to doing these live shows is that it kind of forces me to articulate some of the things that I've never really put words to. And I imagine that's a large part of your own work as well, is that this is a nonverbal medium. And so there's marks that we make, there's decisions that we make that are outside of our natural kind of language to articulate. We just do things. and we react to them. But I think there can be a lot of benefit to saying it out loud and trying to articulate it. So if it is something that you're so inclined to do, consider teaching as much as possible. If you're not already a teacher in some way, a great way to improve your own drawing is to try to teach it to others, because it forces you to really think step by step the decisions you're making. And then you can start to identify decisions that are not serving you. They're ones that you can kind of double down on. So I'm just kind of putting that out there. See if anybody kind of connects with that sensibility of learning by teaching. And teaching, when I refer to that, it's like, it's really articulating, just saying this is what I do, all right? Not how you should do it, is my mentality. Maybe it's how you want to do it. But all I can tell you is what I do and what things running through my head, and then it becomes a dialogue about what is serving you, what will move you in the right direction. All right, so I'm just kind of picking away, but I think I'm going to call it a day. I don't know as if I'm going to be doing a whole lot more to this drawing. I feel like it's a so-so drawing. I feel like I captured the overall expression. I feel like this is still a little awkward down in here, but it is what it is. But I need to get going. This has been awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you're still working on yours, really, I'm not going to, if I were to continue to work on this, I wouldn't be making any significantly different decisions. I would be doing the same thing, just kind of picking in certain areas to try to bring it together a little bit more. But it's all very minor at this stage. And so I hope that this has been helpful to you. I know it's been helpful to me. I really appreciate all the comments and the feedback, and ways that have helped me to pull these proportions together and think about the value structure. Like I said, I think there's still more to do, but overall, I feel like this is the drawing experience for the day. And that's what this is all about. We're just taking time out of our busy lives to draw, taking some time out of this day so that we can kind of move forward. My expectation is not to create a perfect drawing. My expectation is just to try to, again, advance the practice in some way. And so I hope that's the case for you. I hope you're happy with your experience today. I look forward to working with you all next week. Again, we're going to be working with this cool parakeet. I just love the expression. So I might work on this a little bit more, but I'm going to get that set up so you can, I think it's actually already set up on YouTube, so you can set a reminder for it if you want. But we meet every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern, so you don't need a reminder. You just know you got to be here at 3 p.m. Eastern. And if you can't make it, this goes up as a recording. Okay, thank you all so much. Oh, botanical drawing. Yeah, thank you for that. Let me see about that. I need to find some good botanical subjects. It's been a while. I did a bunch of flowers kind of more early on in the series, but that's kind of fallen off my radar. So I'm really glad you pinged me on that. So thank you so much. Everybody have a fantastic week. Have a great weekend. I will see you all next week.